Welcome back to this podcast, Mind Fit by Robert Aceves and my friend here, Neil Babins. How you doing, Neil?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Great. We had a really good week. We both went to Disney this weekend. We were just talking about that. How was Disney?
Very hot, very humid.
I agree.
Yeah, but it was very enjoyable. It was just it was a battle to try to deal with the heat, to find a lot of shade, a lot of fluid.
Yeah.
And it doesn't keep the people away, unfortunately.
No. Friday was super packed. We had we went to see the electrical parade, and it was amazing. But there were so many people. Like the first show, we couldn't really see it, so it was good. Anyway, today we have an amazing podcast for you guys listening to us. We have now an audience, which is something we love. Thank you so much for listening to us. And today, somebody was asking about your pendulums swing effect that we talked about in the last podcast. So, Neil, talk to us about the pendulum swing effect.
The pendulum swing effect. Okay, well, basically what that is that I used an example of losing a lot of weight, a tremendous amount of weight. Somebody, for example, who was put themselves on a diet program, wanted to take off their weight. What tends to happen in the pendulum swing is that we tend to deal with the list of symptoms or problems that we have, and we replace it with something else rather than dealing with the origin or the root of the situation.
Right.
So it becomes about healing, not just about recovery. So what happens is, for example, someone who loses a great deal of weight, they get to their ideal weight, and then they start hitting the gym 6 days a week, and they start working a specific diet program and are very specific about what they eat and counting calories all the time and becoming obsessed with staying fit, staying well, become a bit of a guru, perhaps become a little bit, I'm just giving an example of what might happen. They become a little self-righteous with other people, telling them they shouldn't eat that, it's got too much of this XYZ. They become obsessed with staying fit to the same level or same amount of energy that they put into the obsession with food prior to when they were overweight. So the pendulum swing effect has to do with how we replace one set of behaviors with another, rather than dealing with the origin of where those original set of behaviors came from. And we see this with people, for example, I work in substance abuse and mental health with people who are clean and sober. You know, what happens a lot of the time is they have to start spending a lot of time within the community, the sober community, and working on themselves in sobriety. And they spend as much time with their sobriety as they did the energy of trying to find the drugs originally, or the trying to find the alcohol originally, if that makes any sense. So you see it in all walks of life, not just with addiction, not just with food, but if you're replacing one problem with another, you know, if you're dealing with getting rid of anxiety, for example, unless you look at the root of where the anxiety was coming from, you're going to replace your anxiety with something else. As long as I keep busy, I don't overthink, right? As long as I stay active, I won't feel depressed. You know, I have good coping skills for my depression now. I'll exercise and I'll meditate and I'll spend time with friends, and all that is fantastic, and it does work. It does work initially. But what happens when you stop all of that? The depression tends to come back. So we're not dealing with the root. So the pendulum is like you're swinging from one tree to another, as opposed to actually dealing with what's I say to a lot of my clients, you know, you're taking one rock, putting it on top of the lid of the pot and replacing it with another rock, rather than looking at what's in the pot. How come it's boiling over? You know, that's essentially the focus of the pendulum swing effect.
Okay. Yeah. This kind of sounds to me like, you know, like someone who has an addictive personality, for example, and, you know, they have an addiction and they do whatever they were doing, but then they, like you said, they find some help, and then their personality that's so addictive starts to become addicted to the solution, I guess you could say. So like you were mentioning about the 12-step program, and how, you know, they could go to all these meetings and maybe follow the 12 steps to the teeth, and then try to, you know, go to all these different programs, and then they end up becoming more obsessed with that and more anxious because they don't want to miss anything, versus, like you said, to try to go and find what's causing them to have that, you know, addictive personality, I guess, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially, a lot of people refer to it or label it as the addictive personality. But I tend to think that there's a part of us, a part of our personality that is the addicted part. So it's not all of us that has the addiction. That's sort of the way I relabel it for people. And the part of us that has the addiction will go from one, will swing. That's the one who swings from one tree to the next. He's a swinger. He's Tarzan.
Right.
The Tarzan part of your personality. Yeah, essentially, and because not all of you is an addiction. I mean, I would say to somebody, for example, just to give an example, they'll say, "Well, I'm addicted to food," and I'll say, "Well, are you eating right now?" And they'll say no. So I said, well, then a part of you is an addict because right now you're sitting here talking to me. You're not looking for food, right? So, yeah, I mean, the people do label it as an addictive personality, but I still say it's a part of your personality that has that tendency, and that part tries to do whatever it can to keep you away from the origin, to keep you away from taking a look at what's inside the pot, what's at the base. And that's, unfortunately, the way we're designed. We'll do whatever we can to not look at what my adolescent clients refer to as the kids in the basement. The parts of us that are wounded, the parts of us that are really feeling things that we don't want to take a look at. So we'll do, if we're not going to use food as an outlet or drugs as an outlet, we'll use exercise obsessively. And the trick is that sometimes what we do is when we swing on the pendulum, we'll sometimes swing to something that's more healthy or more adaptive. So it sounds good. If I work hard, that's an ethic that we give a lot of praise to in our culture. So if I start working really hard and, making good money or making a good living, that's sort of looked at with a lot of applause. But I could be working myself too hard, and I could be using my work as another outlet. That is, instead of drinking too much or gambling too much or eating too much, I could be working too much. But work is good. If I jog 3 times a day, people say, wow, you're really dedicated, aren't you? I'm dedicated to staying away from the problem is what I'm dedicated to doing. Go running once a day. That's fine, So, yeah.
All right. Well, this kind of reminds me of this research that I read years ago, where they were talking about how someone who is addicted to alcohol, for example, they could go through the programs and stop drinking, and then when they don't drink anymore, and they go to a party or they they're exposed to the alcohol, they experience some kind of anxiety because they're trying to stop themselves from doing it, right? Versus like people who just are social drinkers and they can have one drink, they have no problem doing that, and they take one drink and then they don't have to continue drinking. And so those people tend to have more to live normal lives, I guess, in quote unquote. But my point is that sometimes if you're able to, if you're trying to so hard to not do something, or you do something but you do it too much, then those extremes are probably the bad thing, right? That's kind of what you're talking about, the extreme parts of it. But how do you get to that middle part where you can just be okay with one drink, or find that healing that you're talking about?
The anxiety that you're talking about, when, for example, someone walks into a room and there's a buffet full of wonderful food and is trying really, really hard to avoid it. Every time we try so hard to avoid something that we know we're not supposed to be doing, we're sending ourselves a message of shame, basically saying, you can't have that. And that's kicking the kids in the basement even harder. Yeah. There's something wrong with you. You're defective. You can't go near that. Now, you got to be careful with this, because with alcohol, I totally understand. With alcohol and drugs, you don't want to tell somebody who's an alcoholic, truly in full blown, going through it, to go out and have a drink. They're fine, just no. But somebody, you have to be in a place where you can actually calibrate yourself that way. So I'm not suggesting that that's what people do, but food is a better example because it's more universal. If you walk into a room and there's a buffet and you've come down from saying being, obese or you were overweight at one point, and you're saying, I really have to, I can't walk near that table. I can't be near those cakes. You're sending yourself a signal that there's something wrong with you, and you're sending more energy down to the kids in the basement. But what's wrong with looking at the cakes and having a part of you, remember, it's a part of you that wants one, you know, and then another part of you that does not. Because most people will tell me there's a part of me that really wants to devour that pizza. There's a part of me that really does not want to. And I'll say, which part does not want to? Let's talk to him or her. You know, which part does not want to? Which part knows that this is not really what you want to do right now? How come that part's not in the director's chair? How come that part's smaller than the one who wants to? And they'll say things, well, because I'm an addict. And it's like, well, no, it's because the part of you that wants to has been in the director's chair a lot longer and knows how to take the lead a lot longer. So if you bring in the one that does not want to and let that person, that part of you, take the lead, you're going to have a lot of uncomfortable feelings. And that's normal. You know, you don't want to avoid uncomfortable feelings. You want to allow yourself to have them. But not about the food. You know, about feeling uncomfortable with yourself, with being in that room. There's a bunch of cakes, and, you know, this used to be something that I used to be out of control with, and I really want to have one, but the part of me that doesn't want is going to lead. And if that part of me that doesn't want is going to lead, that means I'm going to be left with something else. Remember the kids in the basement. Now we have to look at them, because before the food would hide it, and now what's hiding it is that part of you that remains ultra disciplined. I won't even go near the buffet. Well, that's not the solution, because buffets are going to pop up all over the place. There's food everywhere. You know, there's going to be food everywhere. People are always going to offer you something that your body ought not to have, you know, always. You know, every time you make yourself a coffee, there's going to be sugar right there. You can pour yourself as much as you like. That's never going to go away. So we don't want to avoid something that is universally there. We want to look at something that is universally there. And if we are uncomfortable, let yourself be uncomfortable. Let yourself be uncomfortable. That's part of the process of healing. And a lot of people don't want to do that. So they'll say, oh, I'd rather wear my Fitbit and count my calories and have a structured meal plan and go for a run. And that way I don't have to feel uncomfortable. I could feel in charge, ambitious, you know, and my body will look good too. Yes, it will. But you won't, you know, you won't be allowing yourself to heal if you do that.
I'm sure a lot of people are not going to like to hear this, but,
but they're going to hate me.
They're going to hate you, I know. Because nobody wants to hear that, you know, you have to feel pain or feel uncomfortable. But I agree. I mean, but personally, like, you know, I stopped eating sugar back in November. I went to this Thanksgiving party, and it was amazing. And there were these big giant tables, and they had, you know, maybe 5 or 10 different types of pies, and they had tons of them, so I could just eat whatever. And I took my nieces to this thing, and you know, I was eating my cake and my pie, and then their pie, and then, you know, other people's pies, and I ended up eating like maybe 5 slices of pie. And I was so like, oh my god, I've had so much sugar, I'm gonna stop, you know, for good. And I stopped eating sugar, and I loved cakes and I loved ice cream and all those things, but at that point I kind of reached this aversion towards sugar, and you know, I stopped eating for a long time until recently for my birthday. You know, I decided for that one day I was going to try all the desserts at Disney. But when I went back to sugar, I didn't feel, you know, the same as before. It was still good, but not like, I didn't have that same craving as I used to. And, you know, for a couple of days after, I do remember feeling like I wanted some more, like it was trying to come back, right? But like you said, the director's chair just came back and said, you know, no, you don't need it. And then last night, precisely, I went to this bread place, a bakery, and I remember looking at this really amazing chocolate croissants, and I'm like, oh my god, I want one. And I'm like, should I get it? Come on, it's only one time. But then I remembered, oh, but I have an orange and I have an apple at home. You know, that's what I like, and I decided not to get it. But it was like a moment, like you just mentioned. It's kind of like that. Like I just felt like an orange and an apple was going to be better for me at that time, and it felt good, you know. But I don't know if you consider me healed from this, or if I still need to do something to go back to that, because I do, you know, every now and then I have to confess I do have that craving for sugar, but not as much as I used to.
Well, yeah, I think it's important. I think it's great that you bring that up because a lot of people, for example, part of the pendulum swing effect is what people will say. Some people is they'll say, "Oh, chocolate croissant, ugh, too much sugar."
Right.
They'll pretend that they don't like the very foods that used to give them a problem, or they'll avoid it like the plague. I still love food. I love. You said chocolate croissant. I lit up. You probably heard me.
Yeah.
Pizza. It's one of my favorite foods in the world. I don't think I've had it in years, but it's one of my favorite things in the world. And often what will happen is in a social setting, I'll say someone will mention something like Jamocha almond fudge, and I'll go, oh, and they'll go, oh, you want some? I'm like, no. Or I'll say like they'll eat some food and they'll have some food in front of them. I'll say, that looks so good, or that smells so wonderful. They say, hey, you want a bite? I'm like, no, I just said it looks so good. That's, one thing is not the same as the other. Right. I don't want any. I just commented how good it looks and how good it smells, and I'm sure how good it tastes. And so I don't pretend to not like food or the taste of sugar or whatnot, but just a part of me in the director's chair now does not only not choose it, but doesn't prefer that abundance of sugar, on an ongoing basis. So it's like once in a while, if I have a piece of cake for my birthday, wow, I mean, my brain will light up because it's not used to that kind of sugar anymore. I'm sure I like it, but I don't like it in the director's chair. I like it in a marginal part of me that once in a blue moon comes out and enjoys it, kind of like what they call normies. What normies do, they can have a piece of cake and stop.
Yeah.
But don't pretend you don't like it, because you do.
I love it.
Yeah, I know, of course. And you asked if you're healing. Well, yeah, I mean, part of your brain starts to rewire after a while, and so do your taste buds.
Oh, I felt it.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, totally. And there comes a point where I've actually prefer the taste. I love Granny Smith apples, for example. I like citrus. I prefer a Granny Smith apple and in my mouth and just savoring that than I would a chocolate bar. Honestly, I would. Now, there was a time where I felt I was sacrificing something, but that's the part of being uncomfortable because it really isn't it is your taste buds that do adjust, yes. But those just act as sort of signals to another part of you, your emotional world. Be with what's uncomfortable. If you don't have the chocolate bar, but you have something else that you enjoy, don't choose something you hate. If you hate carrots, don't eat carrots instead of chocolate bars. It's just sending more shock to the kids in the basement. You have to suffer. Right? You don't have to suffer. There are foods out there, I promise you, that you like that are reasonably healthy. So, there comes a point where, I actually prefer the Granny Smith apple over the piece of cake. But if you're not at that point, part of the healing process is to let yourself feel uncomfortable. Let yourself feel that you want something that you're not going to let yourself have, and then be with the feelings, the emotions, not the cravings. Oh, the feeling is I feel I want the cake. That's not the feeling. That's the craving. There's no such thing as craving and urges. Those are coming from the brain. What's underneath is the feeling. Feeling of sadness, maybe a feeling of longing, a feeling of fear, a feeling of something you're trying to comfort.
Yeah.
And then that's the fallacy. Is a lot of people think that, well, I get these urges. No, you don't. Your brain tells you to go for something because it wants you to not feel something. So these are like pathways to finding out what you feel. If you want the cake rather than the apple, in my case, then be with the feeling of not having the cake. I told once someone said I devour a box of donuts and I can't stop myself. I said, here's an exercise. You're going to have the donuts, so tell your addictive part, relax, he's going to get what he wants. But just ask him to wait 3 seconds before he takes a bite of the first donut. Open the box. It's 12 o'clock. You just ran down the street to do your binge thing. Take up the donut and wait 5 seconds or 3 to 5 seconds before you put it in your mouth. Just ask yourself, what are you feeling? And then if you want, go ahead and eat the donut because you're probably going to do that anyway, right? At this point, you already bought them. So, but just ask yourself what you're feeling. And if you could identify what that feeling is, now you'll know what the donut is doing. It's not satisfying a physical craving. That's the fallacy. So,
well, let me mention this real quick. One of the things I do with people that have this kind of issues with donuts, since you just mentioned donuts, is I tell them to go and buy a 12-pack, choose the best ones that they want. And then I tell them to take it out. And like you said, look at it, look at what they're feeling, and then take the box and put it in the trash. Oh my God, I get the worst responses from this, but people who actually do it, they get this sense of strength after doing that. I don't know if you recommend that or not, but this is what I do with some of my clients, and it helps them. So if anyone wants to try it out, go for it. They can also try what you just mentioned, and I think a lot of this is about insight. It's about looking inside, being mindful, like we talked about mindfulness before, and then learning who we are, right?
Absolutely. I do like your suggestion. The thing is, what I like about it is that you have to meet somebody where they're at. Yeah. So there's no optimal place to be. So I want to stress that, because some people do need to take the box and throw it out. But at the point of healing, when you get to a certain level, here's the thing I'd say: why are you blaming it on the poor donuts? I don't have to throw you in the trash. There's nothing wrong with you. I don't, so I would just put the donut back, and maybe my roommate wants some. Maybe my, my spouse wants some. Maybe I'll bring it to the event that I'm going to, and someone will eat them there. So, because again, ultimately, maybe not at the level you're at, but ultimately what you're sending in as a message that there's something wrong with either me or the donuts. So you're wrong. You're sending a sense of a shame once again by tossing out the donuts, but that might be a place where you want to start. You know what I'm saying? So there's no optimal place, because if you're not there yet, the alcoholic does have to stop drinking for a while. I did have to stop eating foods that were going to, create so-called cravings. I did have to stop my trigger foods, they call them, for a while. You have to quarantine that part of you, that addictive part of you. The first thing you got to do is quarantine the part of you that does that.
Right.
Put them in the cage, put them in the basement where, with the kids. Oh boy. I did have to do that for a while. I had to give up, for example, in my case, pasta. It was just that's my go-to thing, and I had to give it up for.
But it's so good.
I know, that's why it's my thing. Right. But now I have it about maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. But I'm very careful how I prepare it, and I'm not going to have it more than once, But yeah, so initially you have to just meet yourself where you're at. So that's a good suggestion. As long as people, you can't go around the rest of your life though throwing out boxes of donuts. You know what I mean?
Well, the idea is to break a pattern.
Yes,
because the patterns are there where a lot of times we feel like we have to eat the donut, or we have to have that ice cream, or we have to have some dessert after eating our food or whatever. And when we can, do something that is completely outrageous or different, that is already breaking a pattern. So that's the idea. But I see what you're saying, and I agree with that. You have to look at where you're at. Everybody's at different places, and so yeah, I always say use whatever works for you, and and if you have all the suggestions we're giving you, use them, try them, and see which one works best for you and where you're at. Because like you said, everybody's at different points in their lives. The goal is to improve ourselves, no matter what it is or where we're at. Is we can always improve, no matter how low or how high you are. There's always room for improvement. So I think that's the goal of this podcast. What do you think? Absolutely, that's the goal of the podcast, and to move in a forward direction. Forward, yes. Yeah, there's an old saying. It's really not that old. Actually, it's more postmodern. It says that little changes lead to bigger changes. Yeah, exactly. So even if it's a small step in a certain direction, you're heading in the right direction. Yes. So yeah, absolutely, it's a process for everybody, and that's another trap people fall into, is that they feel that they have to arrive where everybody else is at, or follow somebody else's diet plan. Or whatever what somebody else is doing that's worked for them, even if it's like tossing the donuts or stopping for 5 seconds. It's exactly what you said. You've got to find out what works for you. What resonates with you, what's going to help you to heal. Yes. It's different for everybody. So there's not one size fits all. That's right. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Neil, for your time as always. And I think we reached the end of this podcast. We would love to hear your comments. If you have any suggestions, any last words, Neil?
No, just take the first step and, check inside with yourself and do some mindfulness. Ask yourself what you're feeling and allow yourself to be with feelings. I think that's the first step. If you're, whatever you're trying to conquer, just ask yourself, what am I feeling right now?
Mm-hmm.
And let yourself be with it for about 5 seconds, because you could always put it away.
Yeah. Yeah. And always remember that, like we said earlier, everybody's at different places, and everybody has a different speed of how they move and how fast they improve. So don't compare yourself to other people. Look at yourself and compare yourself to yourself, and try to be better than you were yesterday or the day before or an hour ago, and go, start from there, like you just said. So.
Yeah, and one thing I can say is that takeaway could be, feelings don't hurt us. It's what we try to do not to feel that hurts us.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you so much again. This podcast is MindFit, and my name is Robert, and this is Neil Babins, and we will see you next time at the same time, and I believe we're doing this on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next week.
All right, see you next week.
This podcast is brought to you by MindFit. Please help us to share this podcast with your friends and family to grow this community. And if you'd like to donate to this podcast, or if you'd like to share your comments, questions, or concerns, send them to mindfitpodcast@gmail.com, or you can call us directly at 714-328-4661.